Well, ladies and gentlemen, what a bumper weekend for politics, eh? Yeah, and I must say that many of the political stories that are coming out are kind of showing us exactly what's wrong with South Africa. And I really think we need to talk about it. But before we actually get on to South African news, let's just start off with the UK news. And this is the news that last week, apparently the UK announced the net migration hit a record of more than 900,000 people in 2023. And that's not even taking into account the number of individuals that rock up in dinghies. That's a serious amount of your population. Now, this has been going on for some time. As of this year, 2024, they say that there has been a rise in the numbers. So far this year, there's been already 728,000 people rock up. Yeah, that's some serious demographic change for old Blighty. And you see, the reason that becomes really, really relevant is given the amount of South Africans that want to go there. But when you have near 1 million people going there every year, that puts a strain on resources, housing prices go up, all those jobs you think you're going to, they pretty much disappear, cost of living goes up, all the things that most Brits are already used to. So, yeah, 900,000 people went there last year. And I can tell you straight, a very small amount of them were from South Africa, that's for bloody sure. Anyway, other news. Donald Trump actually had something really interesting to say on the weekend. And that is, he understands that BRICS countries are apparently trying to create this whole BRICS currency. You know, that the BRICS countries would then shift the US dollar away from, they wouldn't trade in the US dollar, they could trade in their own currency. And we did quite a few videos on this actually around the BRICS summit and what they were effectively saying on how they would propose to use this new currency. Well, Donald Trump's basically come out and said, for all of you think you're going to do it, yeah, you're not. Because if you try to replace the US dollar, he said he's going to slap 100% tariff onto your import/exports. So he's going to make it pretty much impossible for you to trade with the US, or it's going to cost you a lot of money. And obviously, this led Ramaphosa's government to basically come out and say that South Africa is leading the G20 and they intend to use the G20 to find a way to work with Donald Trump very closely so that they could get something positive from Trump's regime. And this is interesting because Trump's not even in office already, and the amount of things that he's changing in the US is astronomical. I mean, the woke crowd are in panic, Hollywood's in panic, the BRICS crowds are in panic. I mean, Trump hasn't even taken office yet, and he just seems to be clearing house. Which actually does also remind us, nobody's seen Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, so they're still alive. Like, who's running the country? Because Donald's not in office yet, but he's kind of running it like he is. Oh, anyway, let's actually turn on to some proper news, which is obviously South African news. And let's actually talk about the current state of certain things in South Africa. Well, the first thing to talk about is that Ramaphosa did his whole address to the National Council of Provinces. And during that address, he basically highlighted that 28,000 South Africans are on social relief grants of some variety. And he said that, and I quote, he said, this is undesirable and unsustainable. He says the amount of individuals that are taking social grants every single month, it's like huge. But then he goes on to talk about how great it is because apparently this is affecting women, children, and disabled. Yeah, there's not 28 million women, children, and disabled people. He then goes on to talk about how the social grants are all uplifting individuals and isn't it wonderful? But then goes on to say that what people actually need is they need to get to a point where they have like some form of sustainable employment so the government doesn't have to pay them grants. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the very first things wrong with this country. These politicians are shameless. It was during the last administration that Ramaphosa stood up in his State of a Nation and praised his government for rolling out more and more social grants. By making people reliant on these social grants, he was just constantly like, aren't we great? We give everybody social grants. Now he's saying it's unsustainable and we can't keep doing this. And everybody with a brain cell told Ramaphosa during the last administration that it was unsustainable to keep doing social relief grants and all these other support grants in perpetuity. You can't just keep doing it. We don't have the money. And instead, what we got, if you recall, is a load of deliberations around whether or not we should do like a basic income grant, the big grant, and just convert it so that everybody gets this like grant and everybody's got a basic income. This is what we got because his government were just so in love with poor people. that he just wanted to create more and more of them so that they were all reliant on the system. But now he's got no money. And now he's doing the typical thing communists do time and time again. You spend all the money, and then when it's like, oh, look, there's no more money left, it's like, oh, maybe these guys need to get a job. All the political parties, including the MK party, stood up and said, wow, Ramaphosa's presided over the largest amount of economic stagnation in like years, and he's resided over all these youth unemployment that's now, so bad that there's a whole lost entire generation, and we haven't had any of these nice, economic uplift things that we should have had. And it's like, yes, you haven't, because you keep doing stupid things that basically mean nobody actually wants to invest here. You keep putting things on the table like expropriation without compensation, banning firearms for the purpose of self-defense, record crime rates, and then telling everybody you're going to tax them up the wazoos to pay for NHI and basic income grants and all the other rubbish that goes with it. Then you implement BE targets and whatever other social transformation bull rubbish that you think somehow going to mean that the economy is going to transform further. But it doesn't, because they make the country less and less investable with the more laws they put in place that mean that the government have to manage and intervene in the sector. If the government's got to manage any form of licensing, if they've got to oversee your bean counting targets, if they've got to tell you when you can and can't do stuff, people don't want to invest. You know what people want to do? They want to go, okay, there's a talent pool there, there's a resource pool there, I can go there and hire them, and it's relatively cheap and easy to start up a business. And it's not, because of all the red tape that these individuals put in place. So of course we've had economic stagnation. That's not even taking into account the electricity grid, the transport grid, the harbours, the railways. I'm in Port Elizabeth. Our port don't work because there's dredging that needs to occur here and it hasn't been done. So it's at Port Elizabeth. You know why it was called that? Yeah, because it's got a port. Yeah, we don't have a port at the moment. So Port Elizabeth has been reclassified as an inland zone, which basically means it doesn't get the benefits of having a port, and basically goods and services like oil for petrol can't come into the port. It's got to go on road, which means that we have bigger levies. So in a lot of the country, when the fuel prices went down, we didn't get it because the port don't work. Well, imagine up the road from here we got Hankey. Hankey does loads of fruit, and they got to go to the ports. They got to ship them out abroad because a lot of the stuff gets shipped abroad. Oh yeah, let's remember they also wanted to put BE targets on farmers so that you couldn't ship abroad unless you had the right amount of bean countering. And then they're all going to sit there shamelessly talking about how, economic stagnation. Talking about what else there, it's really shameless. I did a video on Friday that nobody watched, but for whatever reason. But in the video, one of the final segments on it, I talked about Solidarity's supposed agreements with the government around the BELA Act. And the agreement was apparently agreed between Solidarity, the DA, and, the Minister of Basic Education, who, let us remind ourselves, the DA member. Well, since that supposed agreement and Solidarity announcing that agreement, the headlines on this have just been fast and furious. Everything from Paul Mashatile saying there is no agreement because it didn't get agreed by the GNU's dispute resolution service, which is basically where they agree all the contentious stuff and then come to some kind of agreement. And obviously Paul Mashatile heads that. He says, well, because it wasn't agreed there, it doesn't really apply. And instead, he said the sections or the clauses of the BELA Act that are problematic, namely around language and admission, he says those should just be implemented as they are. And Ramaphosa came out a little bit further and basically said, well, if you guys can't agree to a solution, then the law as it's been signed is just going to apply. He says, I've given you a period of 3 months to agree something that we can all kind of agree on through the dispute resolutions. This all has to be agreed by the 13th of December. And if you can't do it, the act just applies and it's going to have to be implemented. So he's trying to force people to kind of come to the table and just agree something. Now, all of this is fine. I think everybody who watches this video is probably going to look at that and go, well, good enough. Okay, fine. Sort it out. It's the contentious sections. Apparently, Cyril's office did come out and say, I don't really see why these issues are such a big thing. Let's start enacting the act and we can iron it out as we go along. And Solidarity came out and said, no, you need to agree it now. We don't trust you to sort it as we go along because we've seen how you work. Okay, fine. So that's a trust issue. Ignore all that for 1 second. But you know what we can't ignore? We can't ignore that this was all apparently agreed with NEDLAC. And NEDLAC is an official kind of dispute resolution service that the government uses with the relevant ministers. And Solidariteit engaged NEDLAC, and NEDLAC engaged the government, and so they came to this agreement. But you know one of the parties that they didn't engage? The South African Democratic Teachers Union, who apparently rejected the agreement. And I quote, because the agreement came from a racist organization to insult our liberation struggles. Sorry, I thought you were a union, but okay, apparently you're now RET faction of the ANC. Anyway, they further say, apartheid used language and education to oppress and discriminate against the black majority. History is repeating itself as the beneficiaries of colonial apartheid are again using language and education to discriminate against the black majority by blocking the BELA. Yeah. They then go on further to say, and this is where it gets really spicy, they say, the so-called bilateral agreement wants to entrench the separate but equal apartheid policy where schools must be exclusively for Afrikaans, despite the changing demographics and the non-racial principles of the South African Constitution. Now remember that, non-racial principles, whilst we're about to get really racist. They said that the minister has once again proven herself to be a useful tool for anti-transformation and a suitcase carrier of the racists in this country. She never consulted the biggest union in education ever since her appointment, but has preferred to sign with a non-representative group of white unions to reverse transformation. This is the largest teaching union in the country. Everything's about liberation and liberation struggles and white this and white that. And is these guys representing teachers or ANC RET policy? Like, this is the very thing wrong with South Africa. We need to ban race from any discourse. The political sphere thinks that race is too easy to pull apart. And it's the very thing that divides people the quickest. And I must say that when I say divides people, it's not divides people in that there's this white mentality where there's white supremacy. No, it's like boredom. That's why it divides people, because the minute you start seeing race grifters who just want to go on about white people, everybody just rolls their eyes. Oh, this again. This isn't useful. And again, this is the biggest problem in South Africa. We got two issues that we've seen now. The first is we've got governments that 1 minute want to be highly socialistic. Oh, look at all these great grants. And then when they can't afford it, they're like, oh, how come we don't have capitalistic enterprises? Whilst we got unions representing teachers that are talking about liberation struggles and transformation, the black majority, and how all these arts are against transformation, and how obviously the minister of basic education must be some racist suitcase carrier, because she's what they would just typically refer to a house N-word. This isn't grown-up conversation, is it? But anyway, that's my views. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. And feel free to tell me what you think of any of the stories of today. Anyway, until next time, bye.